if you could point there on the map, where would you have been when you got arrested?
Well, we were basically down near what's labeled as the Horus Temple. Look up any map of the Grand Canyon, it has these areas listed on it. On the outsides, there were pictographs of the god Anubis and some other figures, and I got in a lot of trouble for doing it at the time. I did get arrested. Congressman Dan Schaefer got involved with it.
What did you discover about who gave the ticket to you?
It turns out, it was just this complete bogus courthouse. The park rangers who had issued it. It turned out it wasn't what they sold it as. As a result of all this, I know, the area was certainly closed off prior to this, but after this episode, it was really closed off, and I haven't been back since.
So in these exclusive interviews with Timothy Hogan, we're going to take a closer look. Timothy, how have you liked being in the UK so far?
Oh, it's been great. I'm really happy to be back here.
What was the highlight so far for you in these places that are Templar related?
Well, so far it's been really wonderful being able to go to a number of Templar locations, in particular Templar Church in London, being able to, there's still Templars that are buried there that have been there since the 1200s. So getting to see that and pay homage there has been very good. Also, we spent some time at the Masonic Grand Lodge in Scotland, and, that was a real treat. One of my great-grandfathers was actually the Scottish poet Robert Burns, and
wow.
They had a number of Robert Burns things there, including his Masonic apron, and so getting to see that was really great. But then really one of the highlights was also going to Rosslyn Chapel, which I have a place in my heart for. And there's some great stuff there that we're going to show on the show that just hasn't ever been shown before.
That's incredible. And for those who are listening and watching at home, who were the Templars and how did you become the Grand Master?
Well, the Templars were really started as a research body to begin with. Doing archaeology. People think of them as they're originally being formed to defend pilgrims that were going from Europe into the Holy Land, going down into Palestine, into Jerusalem. Back during the 1100s, which is around the time of the Crusades, there's all kinds of people that used to take pilgrimages to Jerusalem. It was much the same way that Muslims take a pilgrimage to Mecca today. Back then, the thing to do was to go to Jerusalem. So there were people of all different faiths that were going down there, and it was a dangerous business to go down there because there were all kinds of robbers and thieves along the way who would try to take advantage and rob people of, whatever they had on them. And so ostensibly the order was formed to help protect these people going down there. But in truth, what was really going on is that they were aware of certain treasures and artifacts that were down in this region, and they believed there was more knowledge and technologies that had survived from the flood. They believed that there was an advanced civilization in antiquity, and that when it collapsed, we would call this Atlantis today, but as it collapsed, there were aspects of it that had been preserved in pockets. And so what the Templars are really doing is they're trying to go find these pockets of activity. So.
Would you say that a lot of our Western mystery traditions and esoteric beliefs and practices originated with the Templars?
For sure, because they were the first ones to go and try to collect and amass this information, try to understand these other cultures. They were finding other texts, for example, other gospels of the Bible that just weren't known in Europe at the time. They were also meeting with groups like the Druze and the Sabaeans and others who were preserving Greek texts of Pythagoras and Plato and others, some of the Greek philosophers, Democritus and others. And so, Europe was completely in the Dark Ages at the time. They weren't aware of any of this stuff. And there are only hints of, some of the philosophies of Aristotle that had made it into the church. But for the most part, all of these texts had been lost. So the Templars went and gained this knowledge and brought it back into Europe, and it's really what led to the Renaissance of Europe. If the Templars hadn't have met with these different groups and brought this knowledge and this wisdom back, as well as building techniques and other ideas, then Europe just wouldn't have had the Renaissance that it did.
So when we look at these older groups like the Dionysian artificers, and we look at the Eleusinian mysteries, the Templar discoveries of these, no doubt from what you're saying, had influenced even what we look at with Freemasonry. Would you say that they got the majority of their traditions from the Templars then?
For sure. In fact, the Templars had an entire building force within them. You have to remember the Templars were the first multinational corporation. And beyond just having knights that were riding around defending people, the Templars also had farmers, they had clerics, they had sea captains, and they had an entire group of stonemasons. They built over 1,000 Gothic-style constructions across Europe in just a 200-year period, including starting to build the cathedrals of Europe. So part of the Templar rule involved, had a whole thing for Templar stonemasons, and part of that was bringing knowledge back of Pythagorean mathematics and ideas for sacred geometry, sacred architecture, and how are these things? How can these things be laid out across the land? And they were studying the ancient monuments and the ancient structures that were already existing, and trying to understand why they were existing in the places that they were. So
I think that's really fascinating, and I know that you've given lectures all over the world about the Templars.
Yeah.
And on the tours that you do in Egypt, you've been there on the island of Philae, and you've shown the Templar insignia there, or outside of Hathor's temple in Dendara. But also, connecting this over to Jerusalem, there's all sorts of interesting secrets there. And on the new series, you had mentioned the secrets of the Zohar. Let's take a look at a clip now of where you mentioned that.
One of the things that they came across near Jerusalem, recounted as certain clay jars. And when they broke these jars open, they discovered new texts that were associated with the Bible, and also with Kabbalistic theory, in particular the foundations of a text known as the Zohar. Because the Templars couldn't translate all of these texts that were clearly written in Aramaic and Hebrew and languages that they weren't completely familiar with, they had to take them to trusted Jewish sources. One of these texts proved to be the foundation aspects of a text known as the Zohar. The Zohar had information in it that pointed to knowledge of the earth and navigation on the earth that the Templars weren't aware of before.
Timothy, in the clip we just watched, you were discussing how there were these sacred scrolls in jars that was recounted by Jewish historians. How was that Templar influence important? How did it play a part?
Well, it's funny that traditional Jewish historians, going back hundreds of years now, actually talk about how there were these clay jars that had been discovered, and inside these clay jars were these scrolls that had other sacred information on them. In what they found was very similar to, and that when these things were found, it was by people who were working under the Templars at the time. The Templars understood the significance of this. This was part of their mission, was to find things of this nature. And rather than turn it over to the Roman Church, they decided the responsible thing to do would be to get it to the Jewish communities in Spain to translate and to publish. And this is really the origin of the Zohar. And it's worth pointing out that the finding of these scrolls in these clay jars is not unlike, what we found in later centuries with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi Library and other things of this nature. So it's completely consistent with that. But these are accounts going back 300 years talking about it. So,
and that's incredible.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you also, when we go to Prague or Praha, there's the story of the golem that comes to life.
Yeah, sure.
Do we find a Templar influence behind that?
Well, the Templars were certainly interested in Kabbalistic texts. And
Yes.
they studied Kabbalistic philosophy, not only through the Zohar, but through the Sefer Yetzirah, which was, this Kabbalistic text that describes, amongst other things, how the letters can go together in certain patterns to form a body. And this is really what the golem was, as it was said to be a clay body, and that the Hebrew writing on it gave it life. And as you erased some of the letters, it gave it death. So, but it was supposed to stand for truth. And this idea of creating this golem is not unlike the alchemical ideas of creating a homunculus.
Yeah, because when we go back into the story, for those watching that might not know it, is that there's a story, if I remember correctly, that they created this golem because it was also defending them from Nazi soldiers at the time. And when you go visit Prague to this day, you can buy these little clay figures of this, and that always captured my imagination about the Kabbalah, that it's a very ancient, powerful system. But we hear a lot of celebrities out there, like even Madonna, who practices Kabbalah. And I know there's really 3 categories for Kabbalah. Mm-hmm. We have the Kabbalah with a K. It's traditional Kabbalah that you learn from a rabbi. I guess that would be more like an Orthodox sort of position. There's Kabbalah with a C, which is Christian Kabbalah, that is taking from this system. And then there's Kabbalah with a Q, which is more Hermetic Kabbalah. And some say that maybe Kabbalah with a Q, it came out of this either medieval period. I'm guessing, and I wanted to ask you, is that influence that was more of the Western mystery traditions, was that really the Templar influence stuff?
Well, really, what it all ties into is, of course, C, Q, and K all have the same pronunciation, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, but it goes back to the Hebrew word kabul, which just means to receive, and it's spelled in Hebrew kof, which is the equivalent of a Q, bet, and lamed. So it's QBL, basically. So this word kabul is the root of Kabbalah. So technically speaking, if you're going to transliterate it from Hebrew into English, it should be with a Q, because the Hebrew letter kof, is really a Q. But even beyond that, Kabul in Kabbalah has a gematria value that is significant, and related to the number 144.
Like the 144,000 mentioned in Revelations 7 and 14 in the Bible. That
correct. Yeah, and but there's also, there's other connections. Some have suggested that it should be a K, but that would be the Hebrew letter Kaf. And the Hebrew letter Kaf, they say, represents a hand receiving something. So that's why they say it should be Kabbalah with a K. But the proper word for actually receiving is with a kuf, which would be the Hebrew letter Q. So,
that's really fascinating. Yeah. And that also makes me want to ask you about Gnosticism.
Yeah.
And the Gnostic connections. And you did get into that on the series.
Yeah.
Let's check out a clip from the series of what you had to say about that.
It was understood that the Sophia represented our soul, and that each one of us fell to this realm that we exist in right now, and that our job is to work our way through it so that, again, we can unite with that universal consciousness. And when this happens, we will experience gnosis, or divine universal consciousness, and we'll experience it firsthand. So one of the things that the Templars did is they adopted as one of their personal symbols, the seal of Abraxas. Abraxas was a Gnostic talisman who was said to be the son of Sophia. And according to the Gnostic cosmology, Abraxas was what was known as an archon, or a ruler, whose job was to keep people enslaved to the material realm until they had the keys to escape it. Once they had those keys, then they can break free to higher levels of consciousness.
Timothy, in the clip we just watched about the Gnostic influences with the Templars, later on we see the Roman Church that seemed to want to suppress that.
Yeah.
What was the Templar response to that?
Well, the Templars had to play this, they had to walk this fine line, because on the one hand they were receiving funding and patronage from the Roman Church, but on the other hand they did have this secret Gnostic doctrine. Now, interestingly, they were able to kind of infuse this Gnostic doctrine somewhat into the Roman Church at the time, and it started to become known as mystic Christianity, or Christian mysticism. But really, the root of all that was this Gnostic philosophies. And they had to go back and forth. For example, Lord Raymond VI, who was the defender of the Albigensian Cathars, he was the defender within the Cathar armies. When he died, the Roman Church denied him burial on Holy Land, but the Templars, they actually buried him in their Toulouse preceptory building, because the Roman Church wouldn't take care of them. So, they kind of walked this fine line with, on the one hand, continuing to practice their secret doctrine while still having to operate under the church. And they got away with it because the only person that the Templars had to report to within the Roman Church was the Pope. So really nobody else in the Roman Church had authority over them, and this kind of allowed them to actually get away with a lot of things that they might not otherwise.
With that, when we look at the Templars and how they influenced Gnostic Christianity or mystical Christianity, when we look at the turn of, let's say, the Common Era, we had mystical Christianity, we had mystical Buddhism, we had these early church fathers and all the Christian saints, even if it was Jacob Boehme, or you go back over to Prague, you had the Moravians, you had Zinzendorf. all into mystical Christianity. You had this influence that was really incredible, that was a lot different than, let's say, more of the pragmatic later versions that came along. And there are some very famous people that became Templars that also held these ideologies. And some of them I want to touch down on with you are the likes of Queen Elizabeth I, the Tudor Queen.
Yeah.
And you had also mentioned Sir Francis Bacon.
Yeah,
and
who was secretly Queen Elizabeth I's son.
Exactly.
Actually, yeah.
And with that also, you told me a very surprising fact that you said Manly P. Hall, that he was initiated into the Templar Order. We're not just talking Templar Masonry or York Rite Masonry.
Right.
Like, he was initiated into the Templar Order. Can you tell us how that happened for these folks and what were their influences?
Yeah, so, well, I guess we'll start with Queen Elizabeth I. She belonged to, within Germany, in the area of Tübingen, there was which is in the Württemberg region, there was a group, an underground Templar group that was largely involved in the 30 Years' War that was, was a war between the Catholics and the Protestants going on in Germany at the time.
Still going on in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, that's true. But this group was referred to themselves as the Militia Crucifera Evangelica, and it was established in the 1500s as this underground Templar body. And Queen Elizabeth I was a member of it. Frederick, the Duke of Württemberg, was the Grand Master of it in the region. And a number of other luminaries came out of this, including Johann Valentin Andrea, who was the one who wrote The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, one of the early Rosicrucian manifestos. So, but Queen Elizabeth was involved in this, and as was her son, Francis Bacon. And that's a whole other thing, but basically Francis Bacon had to be hidden as a child had to be hidden from the public that he was Queen Elizabeth's son, and so he was given to Lord Nicholas and Lady Anne Bacon, who was serving under Queen Elizabeth at the time, and he was raised, and he was tutored by people like John Dee, speaking of the Golem thing, because he was involved in that with Prague. But anyhow, so he got initiated into the Templar tradition as well through that, and was heavily involved in the Shakespeare, all the stuff that was happening with the Shakespeare things in England, and that's a whole nother thing. But and then Manly Hall, he was initiated as a Templar in Canada, actually, and he ended up one of his missions at the time was to establish something known as the Church of the People, which was basically a precursor to the Philosophical Research Society.
And that was in Ontario, Canada.
That's correct, yeah. So, in Ontario, there was this whole underground Templar stream that was existing there, so which still exists there.
Yeah, and the Templars, they also influenced Leonardo da Vinci, you were saying. Let's take a look at another clip from the series where you were discussing that.
In 1307, against the will of the people, the Knights Templar were persecuted, but their legacy never died. Did you know that Leonardo da Vinci, part of an underground Templar fraternity, concealed his groundbreaking ideas and something more? In a secret deal with the Vatican, he left his mark, an imprint of his face on the Shroud of Turin, using forbidden alchemical knowledge. Leonardo da Vinci, artist, scientist, Templar. His legacy still shaping the world today.
On that episode, you discuss some incredible revelations that there were bribes to the church to leave the underground Templars alone.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned the Shroud of Turin. Yeah. And some authors out there have alleged that the Shroud of Turin is actually Jacques de Molay, who we know was persecuted on Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say about that?
Well, I wish that was the case. I mean, as a Templar Grand Master, I mean, it's a good story, and it certainly would be, it would look good for the Templar standpoint. But actually, the truth of the matter is that the Shroud of Turin was in fact, the first photograph in modern history. It's actually an image of Leonardo da Vinci himself. It was made in the basement of the Vatican. Pope Leo X was the one who arranged it to be made with Leonardo da Vinci, and the cloth itself had been given to the Templar tradition via the Druze. And in fact, this is the reason why, even to this day, modern testing on the shroud has found that A, there's Druze DNA on it, and B, the image seems to have been made through some sort of light emanation. Well, it's because it was a photograph. So.
You've also mentioned the important role that the Druze played with the Templars on the series. Let's take a look at another clip now where you're discussing this.
We're going to talk about how the Templars established connections with an obscure group in the Middle East known as the Tawhid Muhadun, better known as the Druze. The Druze were a group that existed primarily in what we would call modern-day Syria, Lebanon, Armenia area, and even a little bit into Turkey. Some people believe they even had Indian influence connected to them. According to their own traditions, the Druze had originally come from Egypt, and that in fact there were certain souls in antiquity who had incarnated in the land of Egypt and learned and developed the sciences there, and that these same souls survived a great flood and had incorporated their knowledge from a pre-civilization inside two pillars. One pillar was designed to withstand water, and one was designed to withstand fire. And that the Druze had learned of these arts and sciences and brought them forth into the world, and agreed to continue to reincarnate going into the future, finding each other to pass this knowledge on.
Timothy, what we saw is absolutely amazing. What you're saying is that the Druze played an important role in helping translate documents for the Templars, and do they keep this tradition alive today?
They do, yeah. Even to this day, I mean, they still continue to venerate Pythagoras and Hermes as prophets within the Druze tradition, and they still continue to practice alchemy, for example, and they have alchemical doctrines, and they are Unitarian Gnostics. So, and they reside primarily in Lebanon, but I've also met with Druze communities in Haifa, in Israel, and they're in Syria. I've known a number of Druze who even live in Nigeria who I've met with. So they tend to get around. In fact, even George Clooney's wife, Amal Clooney, is of Druze descent. So they get around.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And I know that the Templars, when discovering these ancient mysteries and secrets, they obviously didn't give everything away. They kept a lot to themselves.
Yeah.
Are there any records that the public hasn't seen that exist today that they hold and you hold amongst the members of the order that will never see the light of day?
Well, the hope is to get all of this stuff out eventually, but it's kind of released in stages based on what we feel that the public's kind of ready for. I mean, we're at a critical juncture right now where we feel like we have to get some of this stuff out because our technology has outpaced our spirituality, and people are, and I don't mean that in a dogmatic sense, but rather, we're like dogma with church systems controlling things. What I mean is really that people are losing touch with who they really are, the source of who they really are. And a lot of these doctrines and teachings point to personal responsibility in finding their people's personal spiritual source and how that's connected to not only a greater God consciousness, but to each other. And we need that now, otherwise we're going to destroy ourselves.
I completely agree with you. And when the Templars were being persecuted and every false accusation you could make was thrown at them, they no doubt went into survival mode.
For sure.
We know that when they were the Knights Templars, we had the Knights Hospitallers. We saw the Knights of Malta.
Yeah.
Some have said they became the Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And they had to survive. They had to do all kinds of things to stay under the radar. What would you say was their greatest secret to surviving?
Well, they had to adapt. They had to adapt to the countries and the cultures in which they lived. Many of them even went back into the Holy Land and just converted to Islam, and joined Sufi orders and traditions, or they entered into the Druze communities, or they became stonemasons, or in Portugal they just changed their name and became the Knights of Christ. So there was, and also many of them sailed over into the New World, into the Americas, and were and blended in with native traditions of indigenous First Nation native tribes. I mean, including Algonquin tribes and Mandan and other tribal systems. I mean, if you go down to Panama, for example, there's a whole Indian tribe down there known as the White Indians of Darien, and they're called the White Indians of Darien because they have European features. They have white skin and blue eyes, and that didn't just happen by accident. I mean, it came from Templars who had made their way down into that region and crossbred genetically with these tribes down there. So they just had to adapt in different ways.
When the Templars were persecuted and there was a hunt for them, famously, as we mentioned, they went after Jacques de Molay on Friday the 13th, 1307, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And he was burned at the stake.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at a clip from the series where you discuss King Philip the Fair of France and what happened there.
Okay.
Philip the Fair quickly realized that the only way he could get the money that he needed in order to, A, no longer have to pay back the debts he owed the Templar Order, but B, to get the money he needed for the wars that he wanted to wage, was to devise a plan to suppress the Templar Order so that he could get access to their wealth. Tied into this was the fact that the Roman Church, of course, was concerned about the fact that the Templars were sitting on treasures and secrets that they suspected had been smuggled out of Jerusalem and were in hiding somewhere. And the Templars and the Roman Church wanted these artifacts from the Templars. Even though the Templars had passed on certain manuscripts and ideas to the Cistercian order, who they were very close with, even the Cistercians themselves were reluctant to turn everything over to the Roman Church that they were said to be a part of. So it caused a real problem. And for the Roman Church and the French king, in order to consolidate power, they had to come up with a plan in order to do it. King Philip the Fair, Philip IV, had an idea on how to do this. And so he tried to influence popes, sometimes through coercion and sometimes through negotiation, to try to wrestle power out of the Templar order. He finally found a pope who was willing seemed to be willing to help him somewhat in this regard, and this was Pope Clement V. An arrangement was made between Philip the Fair and Pope Clement V that they would suppress the Templar order. King Philip the Fair then initiated arrest orders. He had them drawn up in September of 1307 that suggested within a month the Templar people would be ordered to round up Templars wherever they were and to suppress them and bring them in on charges of heresy.
Timothy, in the clip we just watched and what you described is probably the most shocking and detrimental thing that happened to the Templars.
Yeah.
And you would think this would be the end of them. You'd think they got all the Templars when they got Jacques de Molay. Would you say that this slowed down the order, that it suppressed them, or would you say that this just made them stronger? Were they more inspired after that? And what was their mission moving forward?
Well, I mean, again, they knew that the suppression was going to come, and they knew they had a mission that was bigger than, just what was happening in France or just what was happening in Europe. So that mission stayed true. I mean, they protected the holy artifacts, they protected the knowledge, and they continued to move forward, and it continued to be a driving force in the world for Templars to this day, for that matter. I mean, there are still Templars that are guarding and protecting holy treasures, protecting holy knowledge, and are still striving to ensure that that people have certain freedoms and certain God-given rights. I mean, that has always been part of the Templar mission, was to ensure that people have God-given rights. And, it can continue to do that to this day.
I want to focus into the area of the Americas, because there's a lot of talk about how there was discoveries over in the Grand Canyon that have been suppressed. And I've talked to other friends like Billy Carson, who famously rented a helicopter, and he went up there and he tried to get access to those areas where the Egyptian area of the Grand Canyon supposedly was, but he was turned away by officials that he said were from NASA. You've had your own experiences there, and I wanted you to tell us all about that, as well as how that relates to the Templars.
Sure. Well, I mean, Templars have always continued. They've always been known for exploration, and they've always sought out the roots of ancient civilization, and they've been very interested in exploration of ancient civilizations. And, of course, part of that, there's been this pervading story for a long time about Egyptian travelers to the Grand Canyon in ancient times. And so I got together a group of Templars in would have been about 1997 now at this point, so it was a while ago. And we went to the Grand Canyon to try to find this Egyptian temple. We found it. We found the caves. They were all cemented up, but on the outsides there were pictographs of the god Anubis and some other figures, and I got in a lot of trouble for doing it at the time. I did get arrested ended up getting a ticket that ended up being from a bogus courthouse, and Congressman Dan Schaefer got involved with it from the 6th District of Colorado, who was in charge of the National Park Service stuff at the time, and yeah.
That's quite incredible. And when he went to investigate this for you and you looked further, what did you discover about who gave the ticket to you?
Well, yeah, so it turns out, I mean, it was just this complete bogus courthouse and the people that were that had issued it, the park rangers who had issued it, were I don't know. I mean, it turned out it wasn't what they sold it as, and as a result of all this, I know, the area was certainly closed off prior to this, but after this episode, it was really closed off, and I haven't been back since. So.
Can you show us in front of you there what is on the table? Because we see a map, first of all.
Yeah, there's a map, and it shows kind of the geometry that we were calculating out related to the different spots. I mean, there is areas around the Grand Canyon that are labeled, Tower of Ra, Osiris Temple, Isis Temple, Cheops Pyramid, Horus Temple, Tower of Set. And so we were trying to triangulate these different areas. We figured they were named this for a reason.
Where would you have been, if you could point there on the map, where would you have been when you got arrested?
Well, we were basically down near what's labeled as the Horus Temple at the time. And if you can look up any map of the Grand Canyon, look at any topological map of the Grand Canyon, it has these areas listed on it. So that's where we were, and this is where we found the cave, and we actually found. Just outside the cave was this pictograph. We actually have photos. I have photos of the cave.
And that's of Anubis.
Yeah, and then there's this Anubis figure that was just outside of the cave. It was like a pictograph carved into the.
That's incredible,
side.
and these are actually physical photographs, folks, because in 1997, when you're out there, digital cameras,
they didn't exist.
They weren't a thing.
And we didn't, now, of course, you would with a digital camera, you could have made sure that the photos turned out and everything else. I mean, at the time, I was just taking photos, hoping they would turn out, and, brought them back to Denver afterwards and to get them developed. And fortunately, they turned out. They're not as crisp and clear as I would have liked. If I had a digital camera now, it would be easy to do it. But
you've talked about these ossuaries and holy bodies, and that's something that was discussed on the series.
Yeah.
Let's check out a clip.
As the Templars were breaking into tombs, literally in the area of East Jerusalem, they came across a particular tomb, and in breaking through the wall and entering inside, they found a series of ossuaries. Now, an ossuary is a stone box, which usually has writing on the outside, and contained within these boxes are bones of the deceased. And sometimes other things are put in there as well. Including little jars or jewelry that contain special things associated with that individual. Well, in this particular tomb in East Jerusalem, the Templars found ossuaries that contained within them the names of what appeared to be very significant people from the New Testament. They found a particular ossuary with the name of Yeshua or Jesus on it. Another one with Mary of Magdal, which would have been Mary Magdalene. Another one with what appeared to be their children, and another ossuary with John the Baptist.
In this clip we just watched, you're talking about members of the Holy Family. You're talking about Jesus, Mary Magdalene, John the Baptist, and their children. And what's being implied here is that these bodies were discovered by the Templars who were in possession of it, and the possibility that they were brought to America.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, it was known that these bones couldn't, if they were handed over to the Roman Church at the time, they would have absolutely disappeared. Of course, the controversy with it is that it kind of changes the Christian narrative. And in our opinion, it doesn't negate what the New Testament says. It just forces us to look at it in a new way, in a new interpretation. But it does imply, at least according to what we're seeing, that Mary Magdalene was married to John the Baptist prior, and that they had children prior to him dying. And then Mary Magdalene married Jesus after that fact, and then they also had children. So
that's fascinating, and we find those implications in the Da Vinci Code. We find those implications even when we look over at Holy Blood, Holy Grail by Bayesian and Lee, and other books that have been written about this. And what immediately comes to mind for me when we talk about those are the Rosslyn Chapel. Because, of course, we have that connection with the Da Vinci Code.
Sure.
And what I also loved about this series is that you guys went out exploring, you went into these places, and you made some fascinating discoveries, and I believe that relates to what the Templars discovered in the Americas. Let's watch a clip from when you went to the Rosslyn Chapel.
Okay.
One of the structures that the Templars built in Europe after their travels to the New World was a chapel in northern Scotland known as Rosslyn Chapel, not far from Edinburgh. Rosslyn Chapel has within it a number of ideas from the philosophies of the Templars, but some of the most important things that are found in there that is beyond the most people seems to miss is the fact that there are aloe cactus and American corn carved into the arches at Rosslyn Chapel. There's also a flower, it's a trefoil flower, which is a 3-petaled flower that can be found carved in the Rosslyn Chapel, and the only place you can find this is in North America. Not only this, if this were not enough, also found throughout Rosslyn Chapel is depicted Mayan pyramids that are carved towards the ceiling in Rosslyn Chapel. This was in commemoration of the close connection between the Templars and those Nahuatl cultures, the Mayan, the Aztecs, and others, in North America.
What exactly were we looking at up there in the Rosslyn Chapel?
Well, so one of the great secrets of Rosslyn Chapel is that depicted throughout Rosslyn Chapel are a number of forms of vegetation, which can only be found in the New World of the Americas, including Mayan pyramid temples being depicted. In fact, you literally see Mayan pyramid temples with Native American corn or maize coming out of it, forming the arch. And the Templars did have connections with the Mayans. I've spent time in the Yucatan with Mayan tribes that continue to pass on the same secret Templar grip or handshake and they continue to do initiation ceremonies that the Templars to this day continue to do as well.
Fascinating.
So that connection is there, and certainly places like Nakamul near Koba, and places like Chichen Itza that have these pyramids. These same pyramids are being depicted at Rosalind Chapel.
That's truly fascinating that we find this connection, and that the Templars already had known about these places, already mapped them out, already encountered these people long before Columbus.
Correct, yeah.
They were spread out. And I want to bring this back over to Templar treasures, because they made all kinds of discoveries, and the one that comes to mind is the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
And the Indiana Jones movies are the first thing I think of with this.
Sure.
What was the Ark of the Covenant, and why is it so significant?
Well, the Ark of the Covenant was really just a capacitor, a large electrical capacitor. It would build up static electricity over a period of days that would then discharge it through the angels on the top of it. But put within this was this mana. So really the ark was made to store the mana, which was a superconductive substance. And then the temple, Solomon's temple, was built to store the ark. So it was all designed to store the special mana. But when this superconductive substance was put in this electrical capacitor, it would issue a tremendous amount of electricity. And the Templar Order actually discovered 6 arcs. We think we know where at least 3 other ones are that we just haven't been able to get to at this time.
Well, you and I have seen that in Egypt when we were there
Correct.
together walking around, that we see there's multiple arcs that are mentioned.
Multiple arcs.
And you think, well, where did they go?
Right.
And if I think about it like that, if you could take pure photonic energy with no mass and put it inside of a box, you have the most powerful weapon on Earth.
For sure. And, you see these depicted not only in Egypt and in places like Dendera and Edfu and other places, but you also find it depicted in some of the Sumerian reliefs as well.
Wow.
You see the Anunnaki with these boxes. So it was something that was utilized in the ancient world. We believe it was an Atlantean technology originally, and that they were used to produce large amounts of power within certain areas that was kind of broadcasted within the region along electromagnetic lines of force around the planet. So,
That's really incredible. And what can you tell us about the Holy Grail?
well, the Holy Grail really represented the meeting point between the human consciousness and the greater collective God consciousness. It's really what it represented. But it took on different forms in different Grail texts. In some texts it's described as an emerald that came out of the crown of Lucifer after there was this war in heaven, and it was brought to earth by neutral angels. And of course, this is really alluding to is the emerald tablet that's associated with Hermes. In fact, even the character in Wolfram von Eschenbach's book Parsifal, who helps to reveal the Grail story, is a character named Trevisrent the Hermit. Well, the word hermit comes from Hermes, and Trevisrent means, in Old German, it means threefold knower. So this character of Trevisrent the Hermit is Hermes Trismegistus, yeah.
It makes perfect sense, especially when we think about the idea that you drink from this Grail cup and you get everlasting life, and this is alluded to with these alchemical secrets, which I do want to get into with you on further episodes here.
Yeah.
But if we look at these treasures, where some have lumped in the Holy Grail, the Ark, and these things, a lot of people have speculated where the Ark of the Covenant could be.
Yeah.
And I know there was a Seventh-day Adventist fellow, I think his name was Ron Wyatt, I want to say, that was looking for this Ark and speculating, hey, it could be in Jerusalem. Most famously, Graham Hancock, he's written about it and believed it was in Axum, Ethiopia.
Ethiopia, sure.
And I want to ask you, being the Grand Master of the Knights Templars and having access to this knowledge, having access to these vaults and information with Scott Walter, where do you suppose that it was hidden, and where is it today?
Well, I mean, there's certainly one of the arks is probably in Axum, Ethiopia. But again, at least according to our records, there's 10 arks traditionally in antiquity. So we have 6 of them. I'm not at liberty to say exactly where they are right now, but they are being protected. They are in the Americas. And they are partially being protected. Some of them are being protected on native reservation land. And we've had close associations with certain native tribes who've helped to protect these things, and you know there are others that are in areas that are they're easily accessible if you know where they are, but they're not easy to get to because of where they are. So,
but since we're on the subject of talking about treasures, discoveries, and the connection to the Americas, what brought these into the Americas? If they're being brought and stored there, was it the founding fathers with their Masonic connections? What was, again, the connection with Masonry at that time and the Templars? Was it just an easy crossover, a bridge between these systems? So were the majority of these left in the Americas then?
Yeah, I mean, you have to, the United States in particular, but also, you know, other countries that started to get set up in the Americas were set up to be almost like a New Jerusalem, or a place that of safety where people had their God-given rights would be protected, and that these philosophies associated with this tradition could thrive, and it was known that these artifacts could be safely stored there. Certainly, Freemasonry was connected into this. I mean, there's always been a close connection between the Templar work and Freemasonry. Freemasonry continues to have upper degrees within its different systems that celebrates and promotes the Templar lineage and connection. And so the political systems and the states that were set up by the Founding Fathers, including, by the way, my great-grandfather, General Joseph Warren, who was one of the martyrs of the American Revolutionary War, they were designed to protect this stuff, to protect this knowledge, and to find a place where it could thrive for the rest of the world.
With these ancient traditions that the Templars were discovering, I mean, that in itself is a secret, like we were talking about with the Druze before, about how these sacred Hermetic texts were translated. And there's no doubt when we look at the story of alchemy, which is something you know more about than anyone else I have ever talked to. And that's not an exaggeration. I mean, you have an alchemy lab in your house.
It's true.
But when we look at these texts, they are treasures unto themselves. They really are. Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And they no doubt had to do something about this. And when these traditions were coming into America, where was this knowledge disseminated? Where do we find it the most? Was it just in secret societies, or was it brought into educational institutes and religious groups as well?
Well, there's always been an attempt to get things out. I mean, oftentimes what is esoteric today ends up becoming profane tomorrow. I mean, for example, the works that, the things that Isaac Newton was studying on alchemy back in his day are now standard things that are taught in chemistry classes in high schools and all across the world. So it's just a question of making people aware of it and accepting a bigger picture of what's going on. Certainly to this day, the Templar traditions, of which there are several lineages and there are several orders that have formed over time, try to preserve the knowledge of these ancient mysteries and the knowledge of everything from the technology to the psychology and to the spiritual philosophies in the hopes that it could be passed on moving forward. And it's hoped that with these keys, should civilization collapse again like it has in the past, I mean, just like how Atlantis collapsed in the past, that each person within these traditions who had learned this stuff would have within them the keys to rebuild civilization. And, hopefully it never comes to that, but history has shown that it does come to that all the time. So,
But it seems like there's many groups out there that have the keys to the mysteries, and one of those groups traditionally has been Freemasonry, which was a big part of the founding of America.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty, it says this is a gift to the First Masonic Republic from the French Grand Orient Temple Masons. We see this is what brought the delegates together, these traditions that were there. Let's take a look at another clip from the show that will show us the Masonic connection to the Templars.
But the tradition continued to be preserved in subtle ways within this new fraternity known as Freemasonry. In fact, some of the earliest manuscripts within Europe that make reference to Masons coming into Europe include the Regius manuscript or the Regius poem, which specifically talks about Masons coming into Europe during the time of King Alastair from Egypt. This manuscript, which seems to date from the late 1300s, was directly after the Templars had been suppressed.
When we look at Freemasonry today, how much of that is from the Templars?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, there are certainly certainly some of the things within the rituals are directly from the Templars. And the underlying philosophy of passing on the even some of the earliest documents within Freemasonry, for example, Anderson's Constitutions of Freemasonry, which was published shortly after the formation of the Grand Lodge of England, specifically refers to Freemasonry as the Noahite religion, or the religion of Noah. In other words, the tradition that was preserving the knowledge of things after the flood. And it's, referring, of course, to the Great Flood, the same flood that would have destroyed Atlantis.
And let me just jump in that point that you're making, is that there's been some documentaries made that were focused on the UGLE over here in England, the United Grand Lodge of England, where it was sort of demystifying the outer layers of Freemasonry, so those that had any preconceived notions, they could see what Masonry was all about. So it's been discussed about the Masonic allegories and the philosophies about who Hiram Abiff was.
Yeah.
And how he goes through this transition that's all a part of this awakening and the initiation that a candidate would go through when they become a Mason, and how that relates to Solomon and Solomon's temple and everything. So what I think is really interesting also about what you're saying is that if this is all about, with these traditions that the Templars and then the Masons were bringing forth, it was all about what to do if we ever go through a cataclysmic loss of civilization. Just as you're making this point, Randall Carlson's making this point about cycles. Graham Hancock's making this point.
Yeah.
Hey, if we have another younger Dryas, these people, as you've said before, are memorizing a system so that they would know what to do. Let's say we lost all the technology, all the infrastructure. What do we do? So you're saying that this tradition was originally, before that, was based on Noah, who built an ark to preserve society, right?
Correct. I mean, even like one of the fundamental things that's taught within Freemasonry to this day is the study of the 7 liberal arts and sciences,
like the trivium. And,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, and these are the things that you need to rebuild civilization, and every Mason in part of their Masonic work is taught to inculcate and study these 7 liberal arts and sciences, so they know them, so that wouldn't even have to be a flood if we had a large enough solar flare tomorrow that like a Carrington event that took place in the 1800s, it would wipe out all of our technologies. Nothing would work. Your toilets wouldn't work because the pumps that are needed to pump the water wouldn't get to you. Your electricity wouldn't work. Your cell phones wouldn't work. All the knowledge that you have stored digitally would be gone. So, by some estimates, within only a few months, 85% of the population would die.
Yeah.
So, how do you rebuild civilization? Well, it's going to take people who have studied and have tried to remember these 7 liberal arts and sciences, for example, that would have the keys or the seeds to rebuild civilization.
And that's what all the memorizing is for, and the memory
Correct.
work of what one learns when they become a Mason. And it's interesting because, again, when you go back to that 12,800 years or 11,600, when they talk about the Younger Dryas cataclysm and civilization getting wiped out, and of course that's where we relate this Atlantis story to, that Plato famously gives us in the Timaeus and Critias, that he learned from Egypt.
Right.
It's fascinating because you and I have discussed this before at length, that when we look at these individuals who are almost like, we'll just say tongue-in-cheek, an Atlantean missionary after the cataclysms, you get, whether it's Quetzalcoatl, whether you go back over into Osiris in Egypt, or what you and I have seen on the temples of Edfu, where there's these seafaring progenitors that are going around the world to a primitive people. We most certainly get that with the story of Nimrod, where we go, some call them Sidon or Oannes. I want to ask you about him in just a moment on how that relates to the Templars, because I think that's a very important part, that there was always this connection to John the Baptist, and that was very important to the Templars. And if you guys at home, all of you watching, have ever seen the Pope wearing that funny-looking hat, that fish hat that he wears, the mitre, or some will say mitre, that there's a very important reason that he wears that, because in the depictions we have of Dagon coming to the shores of the primitive people of Babylonia or wherever that was, these people couldn't even make fires. They didn't have a basic knowledge of what was right after the cataclysms. And here's a guy shows up and says, okay, this is how you have agriculture, this is how you have your society. Now, how does that name relate to John the Baptist and the Templars? Why is that significant?
Yeah, well, so like Oannes, he basically baptized priest kings and taught them how to rebuild civilization. And he was said to wear fish skins or at least something that looked like fish skin. And this is what he rebuilt civilization. His feast day, and according to the ancient pagan calendar, was June 23rd or June 24th, depending on the region. And this was Oannes. Well, it's not too much of a stretch. You take Oannes and translate that into Greek. Oannes becomes Ioannes, and Ioannes into Latin is Joannes, which becomes John. And
right,
of course,
because we just throw a squiggly line onto that I, it becomes the J, right?
That's exactly right. And, John the Baptist, his feast day was also June, 24th, June 23rd, June 24th. So it was a clear carryover. And this was something that the Templars understood. And just as Oannes baptized priest kings, in the same way, John the Baptist baptized a priest kings. Just as the old Oannes was said to wear fish skins, John the Baptist is said to wear animal skin. So there's clear ties between the two, and so this is one of the reasons why.
And there was probably a whole lot of them, not just Oannes coming there. It was probably a whole group of folks like him.
Yeah.
And obviously they possessed advanced knowledge. And I do think we find a connection to those ancient men with bags that we see portrayed all over the ancient world.
For sure.
Whether it was the Etruscans, the Phoenician Canaanites, the Babylonians. We see them all over the world. It's absolutely fascinating. Now, Tim, the word alchemy that spread all across Europe, and you had all sorts of strange figures, such as Rudolph II over in Prague, that became obsessed with alchemy. He had the Golden Lane, the Powder Towers, and all the top esotericists and alchemists were coming out there. But he had this science and knowledge about this word alchemy that they were obsessed with, that no doubt came from the Arabs, who had alchemia, and this had probably come not only from the ancient world over in India, but definitely from Egypt, because, as you know, the ancient word for Egypt, the name for it was chem, or
right.
Kemet, and there's a very real reason for that, where we get chemistry and alchemy from. But what I want to ask you is, how did the Templars play a role in bringing that knowledge into Europe and the rest of the world, and where did they discover it from?
Well, the Templars had their own. Well, they got it from a number of different sources. First of all, as stated on a previous episode, a number of the original Templars came from Albigensian Cathar families, and the Albigensians had been preserving their own alchemical doctrines. In fact, they had a communion ceremony known as the Mani Sola ceremony, where they actually produced mana, or in this case was referred to as mani, this precious white stone that was included as part of their communion rite. This, by the way, the same mani is what you find in the Tibetan and Buddhist traditions when you see like the Om Mani Padme Hum.
Incredible.
The mani is the precious white stone, So, but anyhow, so they already had some doctrines associated with that. A number of the Templars had also been involved in a order known as the Order of the Rose Cross, and it got this name really from this area in Giza. The original name for Giza was Rostau, and Ros can be translated into meaning rose, and Tau was another word for cross. So Rose Cross, was where the code name, if you will, for this area of Rostau or Giza in Egypt, which of course is where alchemical processes were being preserved. The Templars also had associations with the Druze, the Tawhid Muhadun tradition of the Middle East, and they had their own alchemical doctrines that they were continuing to pass down, and they were translating Greek and Roman texts on alchemy that had come via the, it was the Arab texts translation of these earlier Greek texts, which was really just rehashing of the Egyptian. So.
I want to jump in there because you mentioned the Rosicrucians and their connections to the Templars. You have an episode where you guys examined the Rosicrucians. Let's take a look at that now.
All right.
With the release of the Rosicrucian manifestos, it caused great excitement in Europe. People wanted to know who the Rosicrucians were. And because it remained a secret society, there was all kinds of speculation. Even the Roman Church went to great pains bringing people before the Inquisition in order to figure out who were the Rosicrucians, this group that referred to themselves as the true and invisible Rosicrucian order. In our modern day and age, there has been close associations between the Rosicrucian order and the Masonic fraternity. And in fact, within the Masonic fraternity itself, there are groups referring to themselves as Rosicrucian, which are they're invitational to Masons that are seeking to do further research. Some of the main teachings that were found within the Rosicrucian tradition included the study of alchemy and Kabbalah and mystical Christianity, which is just really another name for Gnosticism. The Rosicrucians believed that they could actually create certain elixirs which could heal the body, stimulate consciousness, and according to their own manifestos, they were supposed to heal people free of charge. They should not take any money for healing, and any alchemy that was done should be used to, if they were making gold, which they considered a talent of lesser importance, that money should go towards the poor, towards charity, and towards reimbursing themselves for their equipment that they needed in order to do the operations.
Timothy, in the clip we just watched where you were discussing the Rosicrucians, I wanted to ask you about this character that we find behind the Rosicrucian order, Christian Rosenkreuz, a Christian of the Rosy Cross. Because for those who don't know, this Rosicrucian tradition, which has all these mystery traditions, but it's got this veil of a Christian sort of symbolism that's used with it, but it's essentially all the mysteries there. Yeah. Who is this character in reality, Christian of the Rosy Cross?
Well, some people say he was a wandering Albigensian Cathar, and that when the Cathars were suppressed, there are legends that there was a guy who came out of it that had survived the crusade against them, and this was the original Christian Rosenkreuz. What's interesting is he is depicted as wearing a tunic with a red equal armed cross on the shoulder, which is, of course, the Templar emblem of red equal cross. But it's also red equal armed cross is also the emblem of the Albigensians and the people of Toulouse, and because there was a connection there. I mean, the Cathars referred to themselves as the poor of Christ. Mm-hmm. The Templars referred to themselves as the poor Knights of Christ. So, I mean, there was this connection there, and they both used this red equal armed cross. Some would even say that the Templar cross was just a subset of the Albigensian Cathar cross. But And, it could be argued that, a rouge cross or a rose cross would be a rose-colored cross or a red cross, which, of course, again, points back to the Templars. So, there were all of these connections there.
Some have said there's a connection to Saint Germain and Francis Bacon.
Oh, yeah. Well, Francis Bacon, some people believe that Saint Germain was the reincarnation of Francis Bacon, or that they were even the same person over a period of time. But certainly Francis Bacon, both of them were involved within the Templar tradition. Francis Bacon wrote his New Atlantis book, specifically outlining, how to create a new Atlantis like the old Atlantis, and it's said to be run by a group referring to themselves as the College of Solomon, the leader of which is wearing a turban with, again, a red Templar cross on the turban, pointing to that tradition, and which is alluding to both the Templars and the Druze. And in Saint Germain, he actually initiated Napoleon into the Templar order in the Great Pyramid. So again, all tying it back in together. So
that's really quite amazing. And I'd like to go there with you right now into Egypt and explore that further, because when you look at the Ankh, which is the cross of life, there's all kinds of symbolism, as you know. We find that it's like you have the womb, you have the bottom parts could be like a phallus, the masculine and the feminine. You have a horizon, the sun could be rising there. It's got so much symbolism as you go into it. The same could be true of the rose cross, where again we bring that symbolism into the middle with the feminine. You could have the Shekinah, or the Holy Spirit, which is the feminine. Again, it's almost like a recycling of the Egyptian mysteries as you made that connection to where these things have been extracted from. But in other traditions with the Rosicrucians, such as when we look at Amorc, we see that they have this statue out front in California of Thutmose III.
Correct, yeah.
Now, Thutmose III has a very important connection to alchemy, does he not?
Yeah, I mean, he was really the one who was setting up all these alchemy labs in places like Abydos and other places, even at Luxor and
Karnak. Remember in the Annals of the King, you see the cakes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, so they were producing this mana, this monoatomic gold is really what it was. They didn't call it mana exactly, but you regularly see this mana being depicted next to these arcs, being in the area, and it's because the two went together. But it's the contention of the Templars and of my contention that the mystery rites of Osiris were actually depicting and were describing the alchemical process of how you take green vegetable matter, and when Osiris is depicted as being painted green, he represented the vegetation. In fact, this is the origin of the green man within the European traditions.
Like Cernunnos.
Yeah, exactly. But he's chopped up, which is exactly what you need to do with the vegetable matter. You chop it up, you then throw it in a vessel and digest it in water. This is like Osiris being thrown into the Nile. You then distill it, where you turn the liquid into a steam to recapture it. This is an alchemical text depicted as birds. We certainly find this in the story of Osiris with Isis. She turns herself into a bird and starts to fly around the chopped up Osiris, and then you have to calcinate down the remaining vegetable matter to separate out the secret salts out of it. And And in the story of Osiris, Isis, she starts to burn oil lamps and incense and makes these sacred flames, and then does these prayers to raise Osiris back to life and in this new form. And this is the whole alchemical process. And there's it's even found within many of the Egyptian word associations. For example, the Ben, or which was also associated with the Bennu, which was this phoenix bird in the ancient Egyptian stuff. Well, Ben in Egyptian means stone, and it also means light. And if you reverse that word, you get Neb, which is the ancient Egyptian word for gold. So there's all kinds of these kind of connections there.
That is really incredible. And when we look around the churches, we see stuff like the Black Madonna.
Yes.
And these statues. And this goes back to what we were talking about with Egypt.
Yes.
Because Egypt being Kem, the
Yes.
Black Land, and for those of you who don't know, who have never looked at this mystery with Egypt, is that in Egypt, as you know, and you've talked about many times, is that when the Nile floods up, this black material used to come up, which we believe was probably gathered at Abydos.
Yeah, the Assyrian.
Exactly. Or they in other places, they took water from the Dead Sea, and they would extract these materials into the manna, as you've talked about. And even in the Bible, it refers to alchemy essentially as the dark arts, and Egypt is the black land, and we see that very clearly mentioned. But is there a clear connection to this and what the Templars discovered, as well as the statues we found around the Vatican?
For sure. So the Black Madonna statues, they came from as the Templars had certain bases of operation in Egypt, including at Dendera and at the Temple of Isis at Philae. And while they were at the Temple of Isis at Philae, one of the things that was found within this Temple of Isis were these figurines, or these statues of Isis nursing the baby Horus on her lap. And this, they were usually made of a black basalt or black granite statue. And they transposed these and brought them over to France and started putting them in the crypts of the cathedrals that they were building, and they became the new Black Madonnas. And it should be pointed out that even some of the earliest cathedrals in France, at places like Saint-Germain and at Notre-Dame de Paris, the earliest maps of Paris actually showed these locations as being areas dedicated to the temple of Isis. So there were Egyptian colonies all the way up into France, and they had built these Isis temples up there. So the Templars, just making this connection, just brought these Isis statues out of Egypt and started replicating them and putting them in these crypts. And they alluded to this alchemical secret, this alchemical tradition that came out of Egypt.
I think it's remarkable that we see how these traditions have evolved. So, for example, we were talking about how we get from chem, we get alchemy, and then we get chemistry. And bringing it back over to the Rosicrucians and what's been called the Invisible College, I'm reminded of Sir Isaac Newton and all his brilliant discoveries, as well as his obsession with alchemy and the Emerald Tablet. Do you suppose that the discoveries the Templars were making, and they were disseminating them down even as early as the 1200s, do you suppose that it's their direct influence to where we've gotten today in our sciences?
Absolutely. I mean, some of the greatest scientists were definitely looking to this knowledge that was being brought back. I mean, from Leonardo da Vinci to Isaac Newton to Nikola Tesla in more modern times. And I mean, even Newton himself, it's believed that the very first Latin translation of the Zohar was actually written by Sir Isaac Newton. So he was studying these ideas, these esoteric ideas. 80% of what Newton ever wrote on was on alchemy. And he was working with people like Robert Boyle and others.
I think that's really incredible.
Yeah.
And you did discuss this in an episode about these scientific revolutions and the Templar influence. Let's take a look at the clip now.
Royal Society itself became a hotbed of scientific exploration, attracting such luminaries as Sir Isaac Newton, who was also beginning to study the far beyond just the scientific breakthroughs of the day in his invention or his development of calculus. Newton was also studying everything he could related to the alchemical and the Kabbalistic ideas that had been brought back to Europe via the Templars and had now taken root and had been being preserved by the Society of Unknown Philosophers. In fact, 80% of what Newton ever wrote on had to do with Kabbalistic and alchemical ideas. It's even been suggested that the very first Latin translation of the Zohar was actually done by Sir Isaac Newton himself. And he set aside special times each month specifically for alchemical operations that he was working on, with people like Robert Boyle and others who were developing the alchemical sciences further. Remember, it was believed that this alchemical science was a science that had been preserved since the times of Atlantis, had made its way through Egypt, had been refound by the Templars, brought into Europe, and now was trying to be understood.
In Hungary, where I live, when you go to Debrecen, there is a very important Martinist church there. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really neat to see that this church has been rebuilt so many different times, and it's sort of thought as the Martinist headquarters in Europe. Mm-hmm. But next to it, there's a giant phoenix that represents how many times it's not only risen up from the ashes, but also that's very symbolic to the mysteries and the connections that we find to the Templars in those particular places. But with those various traditions that are passed on again and again and how they evolve, we go back into this alchemy connection that we find encoded into all of our mysteries, including these churches, and that is also found within the church's version of the birth and resurrection of Jesus. Where do we see a connection there to Bethlehem?
Oh, yeah. Well, a number of the Christian mysteries were believed to be alchemical. I mean, there were Templars / Rosicrucian authors in the past, including people like Robert Flood in the 1600s that tried to point these connections out. But in short, in the story of Jesus, the birth of Jesus, we're told he's born from Mary or Maria. And Maria or Mary means sea. In fact, in particular, it means seawater or salt water. And what happens when you heat up salt water? Well, you get salt through an immaculate, a virgin birth. Literally, salt cubes come out of the salt water. Well, a salt cube, if you unfold a cube, you get a cross. And Jesus is born in Bethlehem. And in Hebrew, Bethlehem means
The house of bread.
the house of bread. It comes from Bet, meaning house, and Lechem, which is bread. So it's literally house of bread. Well, bread was another name for the secret salt or the manna within the both within the Torah, the Old Testament, and within the New Testament. So anywhere you see manna, white stone, salt, bread being alluded to, shoe bread, it was alluding to this process of extracting out this white powder, this white stone, so it's alluding to this process. And by the way, one of the places you can extract it from is sea salt. You can actually subject sea salt to a lye to break down the bonds and to help liberate out this manna that's within it. It actually forms deep down in the earth. It's pushed up volcanically into the ocean, and it gets captured into seawater, literally, and sea salt, and so you can liberate it out of there. So this is one of the great alchemical secrets, and it's being alluded to right there in the story, in the myths associated with Jesus and Mary and Bethlehem.
And in other stories connected over to alchemy, we find the stories of Saint Germain, which, if you go back into Francis Utney, and these various traditions like the I Am movement with Guy Ballard, all these folks traditionally, these theosophists and esotericists, they claim to have had brush-ins with Saint Germain, including Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky of the Theosophists. They say it goes back even to Ferenc Rákóczi of Transylvania or Hungary, and he's passed down again and again. But the whole story about Saint Germain being this immortal is that he is consuming this white powder of gold. And we get that from the Egyptians. We go back into all these stories, even of Jason and the Argonauts, or to Alexander, the Golden Fleece. All these stories again and again, as you know, are about alchemy. So the whole idea of this is that they would consume this manna or the material you're discussing, and they would get these upgrades, if you will, not only mentally, but they'd get long lifespans. So you can imagine that if this technology exists, which I believe it does, of course, and you could show that it would be one of the greatest secrets, and you would have to guard it, protect it, and very important and powerful people would want to get their hands on it. So the Templars, they had these great responsibilities of not only knowing these secrets to everlasting life or longer life, but also great treasures and tapping into what the ancients knew. And Timothy, this is where I want to take our conversation next. And when we look at Egypt, we find the Atlantis story, which Plato, of course, had mentioned in the Timaeus and the Critias, and that had come from Egypt, from Solon going there.
Solon,
What did the Templars learn about Atlantis, and why is that so important to their mission?
Well, the Templars had met with a number of different traditions that all had their own stories associated with it. They certainly, some of the early Templars came from Viking families that had their own
incredible
traditions, associated with, this previous culture, this previous land. There were groups like the Mandeans that the Templars were meeting with in the Middle East and in places like Iraq and Iran, modern-day Iraq and Iran. And they were preserving knowledge not only tied into Egypt, but also ancient Sumer, which talked about some sort of previous civilization. And and the technologies that were associated with it. And then there was the Templars when they discovered the Zohar. The Zohar itself also described the descriptions of the earth. It talked about how the earth was round and how there were 7 continents and all kinds of things that shouldn't have been known in their day. But the reason why it was known is because it was a remnant of lost knowledge and lost maps that had been passed down and discovered by the Templars. So, and then, of course, there were the Druze, who we talked about on a previous episode, and the Druze themselves also were translating the works of Plato, and so in coming across all of this, the Templars were putting all of this information together, and we're trying to figure out, okay, it seemed to suggest that, there was the collapse of this civilization and there were centers of preservation, Egypt being one of the main centers of preservation. And it was also believed some of this knowledge was preserved in areas of Palestine region and Jerusalem, areas which would be Lebanon, and other areas, and so and potentially preserved by the Phoenicians and others. So the Templars were just collecting all of this knowledge, and we're trying to piece it together and then profit off of the knowledge itself.
Our friend Karim El-Kousa
Yeah.
over at Lebanon most certainly has documented a lot of those traditions that have been passed down in those parts. And I do think there's a lot there, whether it's the Phoenician Canaanites, whether we look over into the Egyptian traditions. Baalbek, definitely.
Yeah.
But especially when we look over into those Babylonian areas, I wanted to ask you about this because if we want to think of Atlantis as this great and ancient prehistoric civilization, which may have gone by a different name. We just call it that because it's outside of the Atlas Mountains and where we think it was. But when you look at the Templar cross, it's no doubt similar to that cross we find when we go over to those ancient Assyrian depictions of the gods. We look over at who some have called the Anunnaki. Do we not see a Templar cross around their neck?
Yeah, same Templar cross around their neck, and it's also depicted sometimes in the winged disc that's shown in the sky. Also has the same Templar cross on there.
That's fascinating. Have you seen that study they did that they took these 2 photonic light beams and they intersected and it made the symbol of a Templar cross?
Yeah.
The holographic symbol. That is very interesting. But Manly P. Hall, he mentions in the Secret Teachings of All Ages, and we had said in a previous episode, you confirmed that Manly P. Hall was not only an honorary 33rd degree Mason, but he was also a fully initiated Templar.
Correct.
That he had stated in these beliefs that astronomy and alchemy both came from Atlantis.
Yes. Yeah, and in fact, so, the name for alchemy in ancient Sumer was Graal, G-R-A.A-L. In other words, Grail. That was the name of the alchemical science in ancient Sumer. So, but with the implication that this was something that had come from an earlier time, and that had just been preserved in ancient Sumer.
And with that, I want to take a look at the episode you guys did on the Holy Grail and what the Templars discovered about it.
The name for the ancient alchemical art in ancient Sumer was G-R-A.A-L, Graal. This is the origin of the word Grail, from Graal, which again alluded to the art of doing alchemy in ancient Sumer. This was, again, one of the other things that had been being passed down that the Templars had been exposed to. And if we recall that the Templar equal armed cross, which they wore on their robes, was exactly identical to the same equal armed cross that can be found depicted on the Anunnaki of ancient Sumer, who were also doing the Graal science, the science of alchemy. Then we can see a tradition being passed down. This same idea of Graal can be found carved and coded on the Kensington runestone, again alluding to this science that the Templars were preserving. Even beyond all of this, however, was sometimes also referred to as Sangreal, was another name for it. We find this in Sir Thomas Malory's romances of the Holy Grail, in a chapter of Le Mot d'Arthur, published in the 1400s. But Sangreal can be also broken down as Sangreal, which would be, in fact, mean holy blood.
With these secrets that they had discovered and learned about, being the great caretakers of it, and as you've mentioned before, the idea was not to profane the mysteries, that these were kept secret on purpose. Because we know when we go back, Timothy, we go back to the idea of the Library of Alexandria was burned to the ground. Mm-hmm. We have the story of Pythagoras, who he was murdered and had his little school burned to the ground because he had rejected someone who wanted to be an initiate. And sometimes in the ancient world, when you had these ideas that were so profound and beyond the time of those that were around it in those areas, that they just didn't want to hear them. I mean, again, we go back into Giordano Bruno, who was burned at the stake for making some incredible remarks. It's no doubt that when people come across like that these things have to be brought into secrecy, or there has to be allegory surrounding them. With the secrets of Atlantis that the Templars no doubt came across, do you suppose that they had discovered artifacts that were directly related to technologies that were used in Atlantis?
Definitely. I mean, not only did they discover maps, which showed other continents on the other side of the Atlantic, and alluded to other cultures, but they discovered, at least according to the Templar tradition, they discovered things like the magnetic compass, which we take for granted today, but that was a huge boon in navigation, particularly sea navigation. You talked about astrology, that was closely tied with astronomy as well, and you needed that astronomy also for navigation. Something we still use for navigation. I mean, any naval fleet will tell you if their instruments go down, they have to be able to navigate based on the stars. But they also discovered these arcs, which again were power sources. They were capacitors that built up tremendous amount of electricity.
Do you think that was an Atlantean technology?
I do believe it was an Atlantean technology, and at least the Templar suggestion is that there used to be almost a power grid around the planet, places that we now refer to as ley lines, which were these electromagnetic lines of force, these natural electromagnetic lines of force. They would build these temples at the intersections. And the suggestion is that certain temples, like the Great Pyramid and others, these arcs could be put in there specifically to send electricity through the electromagnetic lines of force to broadcast it around the planet to just power things. And, that was a huge, benefit in the ancient world, but it would be a huge benefit even today.
Well, especially when we think about pyramids and obelisks and why we find them all over America, for example.
Yeah.
We find in very strategic places that there are in Washington, the Washington Monument, over in Nashville and areas we see these giant obelisks. I also wanted to ask you that if the Templars knew about these places above the ground, do you suppose they knew about underwater areas like we hear about off the coast of Cuba or in the Bahamas? We've learned about places.
Japan.
Yeah, in Japan, Okinawa, they found a huge underwater city.
Yeah.
And no doubt there's going to be a lot more that we find. But
Even in Malta, there's clear ancient tracks going out into the water,
Exactly. Now, with these maps that we look at, like the Piri Reis map, was that a Templar influence?
It was, yeah. So the Templars had one of their main bases of operations in Constantinople. In fact, that's where Hugh de Payens and Godfrey de Saint Omar were initiated in Turkey and given their mission to go into Jerusalem by 1111 and start setting up shop, so to speak, for their archaeological work that they were going to do. But the part of what they did in that base of operation is they were bringing back maps that they had found not only in the Holy Land but in Egypt. And had been being passed down by different traditions. They're bringing these back to Constantinople to combine them and to get a better picture of things. And Piri Reis, that's where he even said that his famous map was copied from earlier maps, and it was from that region. I mean, he was an admiral in the Ottoman Navy that was based there out of Constantinople. So
you talk about Atlantis and the Templar discoveries there on the new series.
Yeah.
Let's check out a clip.
They knew that there was an old Atlantis that they were trying to gain the technologies from. So the new Atlantis really was a blueprint for establishing this new Templar state, which would be a new Atlantis where these technologies can flourish and these ideas can flourish, much like what was also found in the Rosicrucian manifestos that had been published in Germany.
You were talking about Sir Francis Bacon earlier, who, as you mentioned, was the bastard son of Elizabeth I, the Tudor Queen. He was actually Francis Tudor.
Robert Dudley was his father.
Yeah. Well, with this connection that we find with him, of course, the story is that he was the true identity of William Shakespeare. There's no way he could be a Stratford man that could barely spell his own name.
Right.
But, of course, he couldn't take credit for these incredible masterpieces he had written that were for different levels of understanding in society. And some of it was very funny. Some of it was for the court. Some of it was supposed to be outrageous in many areas, but it was brilliantly put together, and you would have had to have been educated as a lawyer like he was, or had to have a very good understanding of how things work. And
well-traveled, too, because he had been exposed to, different Greek plays and other things of that nature.
And he encoded his name Bacon into the works, did he not?
He did, yeah. Well, and even the name William Shakespeare really comes from Bacon's personal device was Pallas Athena. And of course, Pallas Athena was known for wearing her helmet of invisibility and her spear that she would shake. And so the name Wilhelm just means helmet, and Shakespeare is the spear being shake. So those are the two implements of Pallas Athena, which was Bacon's, personal device that he used.
And wasn't it Henry IV that the name Francis, I believe, was mentioned 33 times?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so, I mean, the clues are right in your face. But the idea is that, according to Manly P. Hall, that these works of Shakespeare were to prepare the minds for new generations for something he called the New Atlantis. Now, can you tell us why this was so important, this New Atlantis?
Yeah, so Bacon actually wrote a book called The New Atlantis, and what it was an understanding of what the old Atlantis may have been in antiquity, based on the things that the Templars were finding, the discoveries that they were making, the philosophies and the medicines that they knew were possible, and so the goal was to recreate that civilization. And so the New Atlantis was really a blueprint for doing this. In Bacon's New Atlantis, it's a very interesting story that's actually unfinished, but it says basically there's this ship that crashes on this island that nobody knows about. And they get off the ship and they go and they meet the people of this island, and the people refer to themselves as the College of Solomon. And the head of this island is a guy wearing a turban with a Templar cross on it. And he tells them, look, we know the entire world. We know everything about the entire world, but the world doesn't know of our existence. We're a secret society. And we just spend our times here developing all of these technologies and medicines and everything else. And the guys from the ships say to the head of this island, they say, well, how'd you learn how to do all this? And he says, well, it's like this. One day, many years ago, we saw this light in the sky, and it looked like almost like a giant cross in the sky. So we got in our boats and we rowed out to it because we saw it hovering over the ocean, and we started rowing our boat out to it. And all of a sudden there was this force field that didn't let us get any closer to this light that was in the sky, this cross that was in the sky. And this cross then spit this book out at us. And so we took this book, we brought it back to shore, and this book had an outline for how to create all of these different technologies. So that's what we've been doing ever since, is we just sit here building these technologies. Well, if that isn't a UFO contact, I don't know what that is. But this is the outline for the New Atlantis. So then they figured with these new technologies they could rebuild the great civilization of Atlantis.
That is just incredible, because when we go back to a lot of these traditions, even if we go back to Egypt with Akhenaten, as you know, he's looking up in the sky and there's the Aten, this talking disc. You gave a great demonstration of this in Egypt. When I was with you, we had our own experience when you were reading the Annals of Thutmose III, where he has this encounter with these fiery discs in the sky. And I know you've written about Thutmose III's encounters in your journals. Do you have the journal there that has the writings about Thutmose III and his encounters?
Yeah, here's part of it. It says, in the Royal Annals of Thutmose III, we read, in the year 2, 3rd month in the winter, 6th hour of the day, the scribes of the House of Life found that a circle of fire was coming in the sky. They thought it had no head, and the breath of the mouth had a foul odor. Its body was 1 rod long and 1 rod large. Now after some days had passed over, lo, those things were more numerous than anything. They were shining in the sky more than the sun to the limits of the 4 supports of heaven. Powerful was the position of the fire circled this. The army of the king looked on, and his majesty was in the midst of it.
That is
it goes on from there, but that's kind of
That is incredible.
Yeah.
And when we think about it, Tutmosis III is a very important figure. In my opinion, one of the most important figures that we have, and coming out of the 18th dynasty, he was a military genius, as you know, but also initiated into the priestcraft. He was the one that knew the secrets of alchemy. He's an important figure to the Rosicrucians, the Masons, the Templars, to everybody. Here's a guy that figured out the secrets, and he has it given to him in that way. It's rather profound. Now, what about the Templars having a connection to extraterrestrials? Do you believe they were helped by ETs?
Sure. I mean, at least according to the Templar tradition, there has been connections at various points throughout history, and in fact, even at I talked about the Templar school in Germany at the area of Württemberg that referring to itself as the Militia Cruciferi Evangelica that Queen Elizabeth belonged to, Queen Elizabeth I belonged to. And which started the quote-unquote Rosicrucian movement in Germany. They were known, amongst other things, for not only creating this Neometria book with their member Simon Studion in the late 1500s, but they also created, there's a very famous, well, it's not so well known, but there's a painting in the area of Bad Tainach in Germany, which is in the Württemberg area. And this painting is it's a painting of King Solomon's temple. It's a layout based on the Kabbalistic tree of life. And it has contained within it all of the alchemical, Gnostic, and Kabbalistic knowledge that was known at the day. It shows the Princess Antonia, who was Frederick's daughter, being initiated into the mysteries. And in this painting, it actually also shows flying discs in the sky being administered by angels. As they fly around above King Solomon's temple. Well, this painting was completed in the early 1600s. So, based on an understanding of the things that these Templars were seeing at the time, which certainly suggests.
I heard another story that came from the late Jordan Maxwell.
Yeah.
And he told me that he was friends with Mitchell Hedges. Mm-hmm. Mitchell Hedges was the guy that was very famous for the Crystal Skull.
Yeah.
Yeah. And according to him, he said what got Mitchell Hedges into crystal skulls in the first place is that he had been traveling, and a friend of his invited him when he was traveling through Europe over in France to go to the Rennes-le-Château, which was the Templar hideout. Yep. Or the headquarters. Yep. Just like for the folks at home that might be watching, this is the same watchtower that you see on the Jehovah's Witness literature that Charles Taze Russell put on there, because he was also really obsessed with the Templars, and he was a Mason. So, according to the story, he had been invited to some secret meeting there, and he had seen a crystal skull that was present, and that there was a special group of Templars that had this annual get-together or gathering of some sort, and they had been gazing into this crystal skull, and it had been giving them answers. They claimed almost like a...
divination.
Yeah, or a transference of knowledge somehow. Do you suppose that is a plausible technology that they had, like, or some kind of old technique the Templars used?
Yeah, I mean, the Templars, certainly one of the things they were accused of during the trials back in between 1307 and 1314 was the worshiping or doing ceremonies with these skulls, these head idols that they were referred to as. And some people have definitely speculated that this was tied to, they weren't actual skulls, but rather they were crystal skulls.
Yeah, and Jordan said, for some reason, they thought that this was a sort of a communication device that the Templars were potentially using to speak to some extraterrestrial source. Now, I don't know where they got that idea from, but he said, well, don't you think it's interesting that they always knew the right place to go, where they knew how to get out of harm's way, they always had the right information, and he sort of thought that there was a connection. And I think that if that was the case, it's just very interesting that you also see Jordan Maxwell pictures with George Lucas. If you look this up on the internet, maybe we can bring it up on the screen, you see that there he is hanging out with them, and then they go about making that last Indiana Jones movie that came out where they're consulting these crystal skulls.
Yeah, sure.
But is there any other significant evidence we find to extraterrestrials and the Templars?
Well, of course, Mitchell Hedges himself was a Templar, and he was supposedly the skull that he discovered, which was down in it was in the Americas.
Correct.
Was said to be tied in with the Mayan traditions in the region, and the Mayan traditions actually come out of the Nahuatl culture, and the Nahuatl culture had its own Atlantis stories, which mention that there was a land called Aztlan that was their original homeland that they came from, and that it was destroyed in a cataclysm, and they had to escape on boats, and that's how they fled to the region. So it's not that much of a stretch to go from Aztlan to Atlantis. They sound very similar, but one was from Plato and the other you find within the Nahuatl cultures. So the fact that they had these crystal skulls as well does seem to suggest, A, that it was a technology from this pre-civilization, for one, and for two, yeah, it might be connected with extraterrestrial technology.
What I think is really interesting about the Atlantis story is it's also an admonishment for a civilization that might be drunk on the psychosis of success, that has lost touch with who they are, who have become reckless. And there's a very important message there, but as well as preserving that knowledge and the wisdom from there, moving forward. And I think that really is what the Templars have grown into and what their mission is. And it sounds like now is the time when some very important information needs to come out. And it all ties in, doesn't it? Whether you're talking about alchemy, whether we're talking about these Templar treasures, it appears in this journey we've taken so far, we started off by looking at the mission of the Templars shifting from this one of the Crusades, and it goes into them discovering that there's a lot more going on in the ancient world. And it sort of fast forwards now to where we are today, what the Templar mission has shifted into. And I wanted to start off by asking you, how influential do you see today's Templars being at shaping our future?
Well, I mean, the Templars certainly have preserved a memory of the what can happen. We're at a point now, in my opinion, where Atlantis was right before it collapsed. We've come completely full circle now. Now we have the technologies. I mean, even the things like the arcs that were considered such a great, dangerous technology that could, provide all this power, but could also cause a lot of destruction. Well, we can make those today. I mean, we can make those arcs. We can do all the things that the Atlanteans did before, but we also run the risk of falling apart in the exact same way that they did in the past. And the Templars have preserved this memory of that. And so there's a certain moral responsibility we have to try to keep humanity back on track. And if we don't come together as a world, we're going to destroy ourselves, just like the Atlanteans did.
Well said. And when we look at how our scientists have been inspired by the ancient world, whether we look at Niels Bohr, Erwin Schrödinger, we look at Einstein, a lot of them were inspired by the Vedas, but we also know that although we've had all these incredible scientific breakthroughs, if we go back into the likes of Oppenheimer, we see, okay, these guys were looking at how to make an atomic bomb.
Yeah.
And it's clear that there are some secrets that if we unravel them, they could be used for either good or bad. You cover this on the series when we start to look at world wars and the effects that the Templars had on that. Okay, let's watch a clip and see what that's all about.
There were other dark forces that started looking into these same ideas and started developing new horrible weapons associated with them. It should be no surprise that as the Nazis came to power within Germany, they too belonged to secret societies that were looking into ancient texts. In particular, the group was the Thule Society, and the Ahnenerbe of Germany began looking into ancient civilizations to develop their own technologies associated with this. Part of this developed their V2 rocket program, which led to much destruction and world wars. And there began to be a orchestrated effort by the Nazis to suppress any organization that had any Templar roots so that they could take over the technologies and the knowledge to build themselves up as a power and suppress everyone else. As a result of this, both in Great Britain and in the United States of America, the Masonic fraternities, the Templar fraternities that were working underground started to organize to try to stop the Nazis.
Okay, so if I understand correctly from the clip that we just watched, we were looking at the Nazis that were making certain discoveries, and we are involving the Allies, and the Templars intervened.
Yeah, Hitler had Ludendorff create a whole series of propaganda specifically against Freemasons, trying to suppress them because he knew these were the only groups that A, understood what he was trying to do, and B, were organized enough underground to stop him. And in fact, many of the leaders of the Allies during World War II, people like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and others, General MacArthur, they were all Freemasons. And they understood what was going on here and were doing everything they could to stop them. In fact, even Harry Truman, President Harry Truman, said during the news releases that were put out at the movie theaters at the time, he said, I think, I'm going to try to quote him but from memory here, but he said on these news releases, right now in Europe, as the war rages on, there are countless hands being grasped in darkness as well as in light. And there are fathers telling their sons, boy, in your hour of need, if you find yourself in trouble, find yourself a Freemason and tell him you're the son of a Freemason and you'll have found a friend. This is what he's literally announcing on the news media, being put out in the theaters. And it's because he knew that these organizations were the best hope of stopping the Nazis that were, trying to expand and abuse this technology.
It is very apparent that at certain times when we've had despots and terrible rulers out there that have overstepped their boundaries, these tyrannical forces, that these groups that came together, especially when we look over at 1776 and the events that came out of that and what brought the delegates together, these secret societies played a big role. And when we look at these technologies that were there, it's no doubt that a lot of them were protected. A lot of them maybe were disseminated and given to people that could be trusted. What are your thoughts on Tesla?
Yeah, Tesla had been initiated as a Templar into these Templar mysteries. In fact, he ardently believed that contained within the Bible, when read correctly, and this is through certain Kabbalistic lenses and alchemical lenses, was allusions to technologies. In particular, the stories of Moses erecting a brazen serpent in the wilderness to take care of snake bites. The word for serpent and the word for copper in Hebrew is the same. They just put a slightly different accent on it. So it's Nahash and Nehesh. And so he reasoned that this allusion to a serpent also had an allusion to copper. And this is where he developed his coil that was used for his Tesla coil. That was, if you put a current through that, through a capacitor like an arc, you could generate this electricity to be broadcast.
Is that like the jet pillar that we see?
Yeah, very similar. Yeah, and he thought and he believed actually his Wardenclyffe tower that he created to broadcast electricity to the planet was based on what he believed was the purpose of the Great Pyramid and the Ark, and that the Ark would be put inside this pyramid in order to broadcast the electricity throughout the region. So,
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Tim, I know that you covered that on the new show. Let's take a look at a clip now and see what you had to say about it.
Tesla went to work trying to create something that replicated on a smaller scale what he believed that the Great Pyramid was originally designed to do. The belief was that the Atlanteans in antiquity had originally set up this monument, and it was part of a great power system that had spread throughout the entire empire of Atlantis, spread throughout the planet. And that something happened between the cataclysm of Atlantis and then the arcs being removed out of it that shut this power system off. But Tesla believed that he could turn this power system back on. So he went to work designing what was later to become known as the Wardenclyffe Tower, something that was a tower, a much smaller scale of the Great Pyramid, which could do the similar function, that could start to broadcast mass amounts of electricity.
Getting back to World War II, and when we look at the Germans, they no doubt were very smart. Mm-hmm. We know that they had all kinds of knowledge about these Honobus and Foo Fighters and had figured things out in extraordinary ways. This obviously led to what we call Project Paperclip, where their scientists came over when the Nazis were being all rounded up. They were brought in, and where we saw NASA and all those influences. What role did the Templars play in that?
Well, I mean, there were these Templar esoteric fraternities who were involved in every stage of the NASA program, even the solid rocket propellant that was developed by Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons himself.
JPL, Jet
Yeah,
Propulsion
yeah, from the Jet
Laboratories.
Propulsion Labs. Yeah, I mean, Jack Parsons was an initiate. I mean,
No kidding.
he kind of may have gone his own way with certain things, but he certainly the development of that fuel came from an old alchemical recipe, by his own admission, and again, this was something that had been passed down via the Templars looking into these things in antiquity. So, but ultimately, the rockets and everything else were all part of this push to develop this ancient science that had come from the ancient world, and it was believed ultimately that our destiny is even beyond this world, and that we're meant to traveling in the stars to other planets as well. And the Moon Project was kind of the first leap in doing that. And by the way, many of the astronauts who were involved in both the Gemini program and the Apollo program were all well-known Freemasons.
One thing I worry about, Tim, is that with the announcement you guys are going to make, that I'm very excited about, and I can't wait to hear about these arcs and when these announcements come out. But all of our various religions in the Abrahamic category have various prophecies and connections to the ark. Mm-hmm. And potentially you could see an Armageddon situation on your hands, or all-out war. What do you suppose will happen if one of these arcs surfaces?
Well, let me make something very clear. These treasures don't belong to any one particular group of people. There are no one group that's the chosen people. All people who are awake and conscious beings are the chosen ones. We need to do this together. These are the gifts to all humanity, and they don't belong to any one religion. They don't belong to any one government. Rather, the Templar tradition has always stated that the sacred flame is within everybody. The divine spark of the Creator is within everybody. So we all need to come together responsibly for the sake of our planet, for the other inhabitants of this planet, our animal friends, our environment, and even if we are working towards going to space, we can't destroy this planet in order to do it. This is our Eden, and so we need to be good custodians to our planet. And we need to be good custodians to these sacred artifacts. And so we're just trying to prepare people. We're trying to get people to the point where we stop the fighting and we do come together, and we can use these things as symbols of our collective celebration of peace and collective divinity that we found within each and every one of us.
Timothy, that was very well said. It's beautiful, and it couldn't have come at a more important time for humanity right now. I do believe that's what we have to pay attention to. And you said something very similar in the episode you had done on future responsibilities. Let's take a look at that clip now.
As we move forward, certainly we will encounter different intelligences in the universe, some of which have our best interests in mind, and some of which probably don't. We need to be smart about it, just as Templars have been smart about it in the past. It's true Templars had to get involved in fighting in the past, but it wasn't something that they wanted to do. Ultimately, they wanted to establish peaceful relations with people, other cultures. And this is something that we should constantly be striving to do. We should be striving for peace in the world and peace in the universe. Templar ambassadors continue to strive for this work. My hope is that this history that we have shared on these episodes have shown this Templar strain ever so steadily and slowly throughout the centuries to try to bring about freedoms, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, so that ideas can be fostered to propel humanity forward to a new destiny.
In the clip we just watched, you talk about these future responsibilities and where we are headed, and no doubt the Templars play a role in that. And I do believe that they have influenced us not only in the past in every area, but they continue to. From, would you say there are secret temples around the world?
There are secret temples all over the world. There are Templars all over the world, in places that you wouldn't even expect. And again, it's not in any way a nefarious thing, but rather it's a means for like-minded people to get together, to celebrate these sacred mysteries, and to come together to help propagate them in different ways and creative ways in the world.
And that's very beautiful and well said. Timothy, I want to thank you for being here today and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with all of us. And everybody watching at home, make sure that you check out the new Secrets of the Knights Templars. I'm Jonny Enoch. Thanks for watching.